Hi, hello, welcome. I'm your host Emma, and you're listening to the Dead Awake podcast. Now, today I will be taking us somewhere very infamous and possibly the most haunted building in the United States. This place is just drenched in tragedy and ghost stories. But it's not just that. It has history, it has heartbreak, and it's just the perfect recipe for a haunting. Today's episode is talking about the Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'd like to just say, I will be saying Louisville because I've heard people say Louisville, and that is just not. I feel like I sound stupid saying that. So, sorry if I offend anyone, but that's just how I'm gonna say it. But before we get into today's episode, I'd like to give a little shout out to my friends, Mike and Z. I mentioned them last episode, and they gave me this mic, and I'm so excited because the other mic was kind of just pissing me off. But now we have this one. I'm pretty sure it's a Blue Yeti, and I hope that everything is better with this one. So far, so good. I tested it earlier, and it's pretty good. So now I just need a camera. But that's expensive. And I've done a lot of Halloween shopping lately. If you can't tell. I've got these black cat pajama pants on and they're so comfy. Oh my god. And I know I'm wearing the same sweater as last episode, but I don't want to take it off. I've washed it, I promise. But it's so comfy and I love it, and it's my support sweater. So, yeah. But before we get into today's episode, I'd like to give a little bit of a content warning. And today I will have my phone for my notes, so if you see me looking down, that is why. But back to my content warning. Today's episode will have mentions of medical experimentation, suicide, child death, abuse, and paranormal activity, such as things like possible possession. Yeah, you heard me. Possible possession. And at the end of this episode, I will read a Reddit user's story about their possible possession on one of the tours here. They used to work there, so they have two. Well, it's one story, but it's two experiences. And I'm super excited because it's creepy as hell. But anyways, we can now get into today's episode. Let's go. Today's story starts in 1883 when Major Thomas H. Hayes bought the land, and he originally bought it so that he could build a home for his family, and he did just that. He ended up building this nice house on top of the hill that was on the property, and I don't blame him because the view is immaculate. If you look up pictures, it looks great. Like I would live there, honestly, if it wasn't in Kentucky. But the only problem with this area is that there was no close by towns, which means there was no schools around. And this guy, he had children, so he needed a school. So he ended up building a one-room classroom, and he ended up hiring this teacher that goes by the name of Lizzie Lee Harris, and she loved this one author. His name was Walter Scott Waverly, and she loved him so much that she ended up naming the schoolhouse Waverly School. And Thomas really liked that name, so he just ended up making the whole property name Waverly Hills, which is Waverly Hills Sanatorium, so that's where that comes from. But Thomas and his family, they lived there for about 15-ish years. But then in the early 1900s, tuberculosis was spreading, and it was spreading fast. And Louisville, Kentucky actually had one of the highest death rates in America from tuberculosis. And there was no known cure at the time, so medical professionals were doing whatever they could to try and help these people. And in an attempt to contain the high death rates and high number of cases, they actually ended up establishing the Board of Tuberculosis Hospital in 1906. But their only problem was that they didn't have anywhere to build it at, so they needed to find a fit location. And within this location, it needed to be far away from other towns so that the disease would not spread at all. Otherwise, that would just probably defeat the whole purpose, you know? So they eventually chose Waverly Hills as the perfect place, and they didn't just pick Waverly Hills because it was far away from towns. They actually also chose it because the elevation was higher. It was kind of higher up in elevation, so they thought that that would help cure these people's lungs. So in 1908, they started building, and they constructed for 2 years. And the first building that they built was a 2-story administration building, and there was also 2 wings on either side, and that would be where the patients lived. Now each wing would hold 20 female and male patients, which I don't know why they right off the bat just didn't go for the bigger building, because there was so many cases. So if I was them, I probably would have built the bigger building, and that probably could have saved a lot of trouble for them, honestly. But the sanatorium opened in 1910, and although it did its job, it soon reached capacity. The overflow people that were coming in had to sleep in temporary tents on the ground, and that sounds horrible because if I was sick with tuberculosis and my lungs were just crumbling, I would not want to sleep on the ground. That I feel like I would want to pass away at that point. So over the years, they ended up adding additions here and there, and eventually they closed it down for a little bit so they could construct the main building that we see today, which is a 5-story building, and the capacity was set at 400 patients. It ended up opening back up on October 17th, 1926, and this new building was like its own little community. It had laundry facilities, maintenance garages, a butchery, their own livestock, a postal code, and acres of farmland, since they couldn't really go between the hospital and towns all the time, because that would spread the case and defeat the whole purpose. All of the doctors and stuff would also live on the property as well. But the first floor contained the admin offices, the morgue, medical labs, and x-ray machines, while on the 4th floor it was built for more advanced cases, along with the operation rooms. And the other floors were just for patient living. Oh, and there was also a kitchen on the 4th floor, which is weird, having the kitchen and the operation table on the same floor. That's kind of weird to me. But I digress. As time went on, doctors would start experimenting on ways to cure people, since there was no cure at the time. They did things like UV therapy, where they would just have the patients sit out in the sun for an amount of time every day, and they even did this in the winter time when it was snowing. And that's another thing that I would not want to do when I was sick, because that's cold, and I feel like that would just make it worse. But they also did things like lobectomies, which is where they would open up the chest cavity and expose the bare lungs, to fresh air. I don't exactly know how they did that. Did they operate outside? I'm not sure, but that's scary. And they would also manually place balloons in the chest cavity and blow them up, because they thought that the lungs couldn't expand enough, so they did it themselves. And they even resorted to removing ribs, because they thought that the chest cavity was inflamed, so they needed more room for them to expand. But these many attempts at cures would soon turn deadly. And these patients really had no way to contact their families other than by like mail, because this is the early 1900s, so many patients would actually die in isolation all by themselves. But it's estimated that there was between 6,000 and 10,000 deaths on the property since 1911. However, it is speculated by some people that there was more like 60,000 deaths, because the 6,000 to 10,000 is like the ones they documented, but because the death rate was so high, they ran out of time to actually document some deaths, so that's scary. 60,000 deaths on one property. Yep, it's haunted. I already know. You don't even have to go there, I just know. But you're probably asking, Emma, what did they do with these bodies? These many, many bodies? Well, let me tell you. They would be sent through what's now known as the body chute, which is a 500-foot tunnel underground, and it was originally constructed to carry supplies in and out of the sanatorium. But this became the place where they would send the bodies after death, and they mostly did this so that the other patients there didn't have to see many bodies being transported out, because they thought that having a positive mindset and atmosphere would also help cure the patients, which I understand why they thought that. And it's probably true, because I'd probably be like, damn, is that gonna be me next? But over the years, the number of cases started to slowly drop, and in 1943, a new antibiotic called streptomycin, one of the two, was released. But this antibiotic wouldn't actually make its way to the Waverly Hills Sanatorium until 6 years later in 1949. But after they had gotten the cure, the numbers had dropped drastically. And in 1961, the sanatorium actually ended up closing down because there was no more patients to be treated. But this is not where the story ends, because a year later, in 1962, it reopened as the Woodhaven Geriatric Center. And this was basically a nursing home that treated old people that were stricken with dementia, or just old people that were mentally and physically disabled. But it wasn't long before rumors had started that there was patient abuse going on in this geriatric center. So the grand jury actually ended up investigating this, and it confirmed that there actually was patient abuse happening. But not only that, they also found that these patients were living in inhumane living conditions, and that included a cockroach infestation. Disgusting. So it ended up closing down in 1982, and the property was then auctioned off in 1983 to a developer for $3 million. And they wanted to turn it into a state prison, but the people in the surrounding communities were like, no. There's already been enough tragedy on this land. We're not letting that happen. Which I'm glad, because who knows what stories we would have to tell about that specifically. Because prisons are a dark, dark place, and I would not want to go there. But then they also offered to turn it into apartments, but that also failed. And in 1996, the property was bought by Robert Alberhaski. And this man, he was a very devout Christian. I don't know if he's Christian or Catholic, but he was a Jesus follower. And he actually had a foundation called Christ the Redeemer Foundation. And he wanted this property so that he could build the world's tallest Jesus statue, kind of like the one in Rio de Janeiro. But this ended up failing because the cost of the actual statue was more than the property itself, and it would have took $4 million to build that statue, and he only ended up raising $3,000 in a year. So he just left that idea in the dust. And in 2001, it got auctioned off to Charlie and Tina Mattingly, which are the current owners, and they actually live on the property, which is crazy. But they live in the old laundry house on the property. I wonder what they've encountered, because I don't think I could live there if I owned the place. But Tina and Charlie have actually established the Waverly Hills Historical Society to raise money for the building for it to get built back up again and restored. And they do things like tours, private events, and they also have an annual haunted house in October. And you can also do overnight stays there. There's many YouTubers that have gone and done that, and I find that interesting, and I kind of want to go. Maybe I'll go one day, and I'll post a YouTube video about it. And a podcast episode. That would be fun. But since it's been in Tina and Charlie's hands, it's been a magnet for ghost hunters, homeless people, and vandals. And there's actually been 2 deaths on the property since everything else has gone down. Supposed deaths, I should say, because only one of them is really reported on. I don't know, I couldn't find anything on one of them, but there was a supposed murder, and then a homeless guy and a dog were on the property, and they ended up falling down the elevator shaft. That's terrifying. I'm already scared of elevators, but they fell down the elevator shaft. Now that is the end of the history, and now we can get into the actual ghost encounters. First, I'll start off with some smaller ones, and then I'll get into the main ones. So, a couple of smaller ones is that there's been a ghost chef in the kitchen, and it's also smelled like there has been bread baking in there. And there's also a ghost doctor that wears a white lab coat in the operating room on the 4th floor. And many people say that there is full body apparitions that appear all throughout, but mostly on the 5th floor. And a main full body apparition is that of a woman running down the hallway screaming, and she is seen having her wrists cut. People also say they see faces in the windows and lights being on even when there's no electricity in the building. Now for a kind of bigger one, there is an entity on the property called the Creeper, which is said to be an unhuman entity seen crawling across the walls and ceiling. Now if I saw that, I would be running. I would just leave. I'm going home at that point. There's also been reports of doppelgangers and auditory hauntings, such as sounds of coughing or surgeries being performed, which makes sense due to the history. And there's also child laughter and screams that can be heard. People also report having body pains as if they actually had tuberculosis or were getting surgery performed on them. And here's a bigger haunting. There is said to be a little ghost boy by the name of Timmy, and this was an actual kid that lived there while his parents were being treated for tuberculosis. And his story goes that one day he was on the roof playing ball and he fell to his death, but some rumors speculate that he was actually pushed. But the police ended up deeming it as an accident, so most people just say that he just fell off the roof. Why would you let the kids play on the roof? That's the better question. But people who do like tours and overnight stays, they leave balls behind and they can be seen rolling across the floor mysteriously by themselves. And then there's the ghosts in room 502, which is one of the most active rooms in the whole entire building. It used to be a old nurse's station. Now this is the part where it gets a little bit into suicide and stuff like that, so be warned. But in 1928, a nurse by the name of Mary Hillenberg was said to have hung herself by the ceiling light, and it's said that she took her own life because she had fallen pregnant by one of the male doctors out of wedlock. And we all know that in the early 1900s, that was a big no-no. So she felt the pain from all that. But another interpretation of her story is that she actually had a botched abortion performed on her, and it ended up being staged as suicide. And there's another little thing that in the Reddit users story that connects back to that, but we will get to that. Another death in that room is in 1932. Another nurse, unknown name, had fallen to her death from the window of that room, and it's not known whether she was trying to take her life or if she was pushed. But many people say that they hear someone scream, "Get out," when they enter the room. And if someone's telling me to get out of the room, I'm gonna get out, because I don't want to be possessed. Thank you very much. And now we can get into the Reddit user. Now this Reddit user, the post that I saw was from 8 years ago, so I don't know how long ago all of this took place, but they used to work there for like tours and all of that and stuff, and for the haunted house. And they actually confirmed sightings of the creeper, and they described it as seeing a very large, like almost human-sized spider on the walls and ceilings. And like I said before, if I saw that, I'm running. I'm dipping. I'm leaving. I will not have any part in that. But they also said that they saw doppelgangers and shadow people walking in and out of rooms. Now this is the part that connects back to the death in room 502, but they said that a while back, they didn't do this, but someone else working there, or working on the building, had actually found a fetus in the drainage system, which is horrible. But who knows, it could have been anyone. We don't know if it's actually connected to that death or not, but I'm assuming that it is. And someone actually asked them if they ever saw or caught anything on the security cameras, and they said, and I quote, "I have sat and watched the cameras before, and in a short time that I sat there, I probably mumbled WTF to myself a dozen times." Tina and Charlie should honestly they should record it and post that on the internet. They would get a lot of money. And then they would be able to restore the place. But that would be interesting. I'd like to see that happen, actually. This Reddit user has also said that they've seen possible possession take place, not only on someone else, but on themselves. And now I will read the story that I'm so excited to read, and be patient with me because I do not read out loud. I can read in my head perfectly fine, but the moment that it comes to reading out loud, I don't want to take any part of it, but I will do it for you guys. The story starts, we were working the haunted house one night, and the crowd was surprisingly slow. One of the actors for the haunt was a major skeptic and had brought a ball to try and play with little Timmy. While the actor had set the ball down and kept repeating, "Come on, Tim, play with the ball, Tim," he did this multiple times throughout the night, and when another break in the customers came, he went to summon Timmy again. However, this time he just completely collapsed. One of the guys in the room was an EMT and rushed to him, and we splashed water on him, and he immediately looked up at us, then proceeded to do this backwards crab walk off of the backstage that he was on. We ran back to him and splashed water on him again as he appeared unconscious. He looked at us and asked how the hell he got there, and we told him. He didn't remember any of it, and the creepiest part about it was after the first time he collapsed when he looked at us, his eyes were solid black. No whites in his eyes. The theory is that Due to the popularity of people playing with Timmy, the demonic being has started responding to the same name. This demonic being responded to the actor's calls for Timmy and attempted to possess him. It's important to remember that this demonic being calls itself Timmy and answers to the name Timmy. The last overnight investigation that I had there is by far the most incredible I've ever had. The night started out slow, very little activity. We went and talked to the parapsychologist who wound up bringing some high-tech equipment into the building with us. We started in the lobby, which is also used for the haunted house, and he had an FM frequency scanner, a mag light, and an electromagnet field/temperature sensor. After what seemed like forever, we started getting responses. It had gotten to the point where he could request an action, such as touch the little light on the electrofield meter, and it would go off. Finally, the FM scanner started spitting out words, and he had asked who we were talking to, and it responded with Tim. It then proceeded to tell us it was pissed because of all of the people, and that it had recognized 2 of them. Now, in another comment, I had mentioned that there were 2 of us there from the haunted house on this tour, myself and the other actor from the haunt. We were the ones that he recognized. Everything went silent and still, and after several minutes, we had moved up to the roof. This is where it got really messed up. On the roof, Tim made his presence known through the FM scanner. The word kill started repeating, as well as fucking pissed. And while the parapsychologist was speaking, shut the fuck up also started repeating itself on the FM transmitter. All I know is the feeling of complete and utter hatred for our parapsychologist guide came over me. I had this sudden urge to push him off of the building. My cousin, who was sitting next to me, started shaking me, and he said that I had started rocking back and forth and shaking. Once he had shaken me, all was well again. I feel that since I was recognized, I was chosen as a host. Let me tell you, possessions are very real, and they are terrifying. I have not been back since this happened, and I'm sure I will return someday, but I will be very careful. And that's the end of the Reddit user's story. And that is absolutely terrifying. They got the urge to push one of their coworkers, or whatever he was, off of the building. And the guy that also got possessed started doing a crab walk backwards while his eyes were solid black after he had gone unconscious. Now, if I saw that, I'd be out of there and I'd be praying for my life. And that is the end of today's episode. Whether you believe that this place is haunted or not, if you found today's episode interesting, be sure to leave a like, comment, follow, or 5-star review on whatever platform you're seeing this on. And I would love to share some of your guys' stories, so be sure to email me at deadawakepodcast@gmail.com. I will have that in the description written out, and along with my Instagram and whatnot. And every week I will bring you a new haunting story to tell, and I have some plans for the month of October that I'm so excited for, so stay tuned for that. But for the time being, stay tuned for next week's episode. I'm excited for that as well. And that is the end of today's episode. Now let's turn out the lights, get comfy, and stay dead awake.